Welcome to the Fall into Grace podcast, where we explore the grace of Christ in everyday life. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Lindsay.
And we welcome you to dive in with us on faith, scripture, culture, relationships, and everything in between.
Welcome to Fall into Grace. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us again on the Fall into Grace podcast, where we talk about the grace of Christ in everyday life. My name is Lindsay, and this is Taylor. And today we're talking about the hot topic of being married versus living together and what we as Christians should do. So, yeah.
Cool. So before we get started, we just want to give our sponsor shout out that this episode is brought to you by the Fall into Grace Bible Study Guide, where we share our tips to read the Bible by taking yourself out of the equation and experience the riches of the scripture, along with some ways you can incorporate Bible reading into your everyday life.
Awesome.
So cool. Let's get to it. So first off, if you haven't checked up our episode about marriage, I would definitely suggest doing so, because a lot of that kind of ties into what we're talking about here today. So and then that episode, we talk about the blessings and challenges we face as Christian women in marriage today. So this is super relevant also to what's going on, and it's totally common to have a live-in significant other, even though you aren't married. Mm-hmm. So I will be the first to admit that my husband and Darren and I were not married when we first started living together. So we got together and we got an apartment together. Pretty much sounds like the story of every other couple. And so it never occurred to me what I was doing was wrong, because at the time I wasn't a Christian. I didn't follow anything. So I actually thought I was doing the responsible adult thing and testing somebody out to see if this would really work, if we were really even compatible, if we could stand each other, everything. And so, I mean, I was in the secular worldview point and I thought I was doing the right thing, but it ended up working out, I guess, let's just say it that way. But I still, it worked out. But I would say, though, that now that I have a different perspective and a different worldview, that what I was doing was still not right. So I didn't understand then what the sanctity of marriage was like. I just thought it was like, oh, people live together, they see if it works out, and then I guess we'll move on to the next phase, and then maybe the next phase after that is something else. But it's not really about like what you're ready for, if that makes sense. It's more of like, okay, so what are we doing as a couple that's going to glorify God? So I guess I can admit that I was wrong to move in with Darren before we were married. But that being said, I learned from my mistake. And now that I know about what being married is and how I'm honoring God by being married to him, and also to point to scripture, Genesis 2:24 does state, "For man will leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and they will become one." So it's that becoming one thing that is like the real key here.
Yeah, that's
like I said, it worked out for me, and I'm not trying to discourage anybody, but I also think being in the right side of like being what God wants us to do is probably still trumps that.
Yeah.
So like I said, I was wrong, I learned, and now I want to tell you guys what I learned out of that and what to do the next time is be in the right. So, What about you, Lindsay? What was pre-married life for you?
Well, first I just wanted to say, I mean, thank you for sharing all of that. I mean, I think you make a great point that living together before being married, it seems like a good next step. Like, I mean, I have a lot of friends who've lived together, and like, I mean, let's preface this by saying there's like, we're not like trying to cast shame or
right.
We're just trying, like, we're coming from like, what's the best situation,
yes.
As Christian women, and like, and so like you're saying, it's about what honors God, and because really like honoring God the best we can in our relationships, no matter where we're starting, like as Christians, like just choosing to honor God in whatever capacity we can, like sets a better foundation for our marriage and for our lives. And I mean, I think from just a regular, like outside of a faith standpoint, it just seems like living together before being married seems like a good next step. Like you're saying, it sounds like practical. You're seeing how well you mesh together when you're actually like doing like life together every day.
Right.
And, like, will you guys be able to make it and all that? So I totally get the logic. And I've seen a lot of my friends go through this phase in their lives. Jason and I had a different journey together. I mean, I was never really one to date either. I mean, like you were talking about, like dating seems like pointless, and that's neither here nor there. But I mean, I maybe dated a little bit in high school, and I just didn't really like dating. And so I spent most of high school and the most of my 20s single. And like, I really didn't want to date unless there was someone I was interested in marrying. And then like, I mean, I met Jason when I was 24, 25 or something like that. And it was one of those things where like I prayed about it, and I felt like originally at the time God was like no, and then later Jason came back into my life like a year later, and so we like started dating. And when we did, I think we both knew, like, I think it was like the fourth date or something, that we were interested in like pursuing marriage. Yeah, I know, right? It's too much. But I mean, like when you know. So
Right, totally.
So early on, we kind of wanted to, like, we discussed that we wanted to honor God in every aspect of our relationship, kind of like what you're talking about. And so we intentionally started dating towards marriage. Some people in the Christian world call it courting or whatever.
Right.
And that's essentially dating, like, with the intention of getting married. So we did get engaged pretty quickly. We got engaged like within a few months. But then we ended up planning our wedding for almost a year later. It was like 11 months later or something. And we were going to get married sooner, but the timing wasn't seeming to work out, with figuring out our living situations and whatnot. So we're like, well, we'll just wait a year. We don't need to rush it in 6 months. And I'm glad we did, because we had that whole year to get to know each other. And we did, we talked about finances and the future. And honestly, like Jason asked a lot of the really important questions during this time, but we also went to premarital counseling, and which was cool because, like, I mean, they kind of think of things that you don't necessarily think about to ask each other. So that was pretty eye-opening, and especially because the pastor had been doing it for a really long time. It was super relaxed, and I didn't feel like we were being like interrogated, like, why do you want to get married? It was more
it sounds more like of a really interesting and in some ways fun, like, learning experience.
Yeah, totally. And it was cool because he was kind of like, I mean, I know that we both have that sort of like to be as prepared as possible mentality if we can. And it was very much like, well, here's some things that you want to, like, here's some things that, people may struggle with in their first year of marriage. So let's like talk about this now, and here's things you can expect. And like, it wasn't so much like trying to figure out what like problems you'll have. It's like, how can you solve problems together?
Yeah, definitely. I think because problems are inevitable. Right. So it's more of then how do you solve them, or how do you get through them? Actually, that's one thing, if anything, that I could take back. I think going through premarital counseling would have been super interesting.
Yeah, totally.
Maybe we could have avoided a few things.
Well, and see, that's the thing, is like, that's what I love about marriage period, is just like, no matter where you're at, like where you're starting. I mean, if you make that commitment, then it's like that, having that security of like, okay, we are going to work it out. It may be a little messier than we wanted, but
yeah, totally.
Because I can think back on things that, like the journey we took too, and we're like, well, would it have like if we had just been acting out of faith instead of fear, maybe that could have worked out differently. And it's cool because then you can look back together and be like, oh yeah, we both like were kind of a hot mess, and then it works.
No, I was.
Yeah, girl, me too. Totally. And I remember too, like, so we got so we got dated a short period of time, got engaged, and then we were engaged for a while. And then right after we got married, it was weird because like everything just felt like deeper, like every interaction, every moment, it was like had so much more weight to it just because,
Mhm.
and part of it was the transition, and part of it just was like whoa, like that it was almost like I mean, this is a poor example, but like getting a tattoo, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? There's a point of no return, you know?
Yeah. No, totally. That's funny. Right as you were talking about it, I was thinking like, I mean, going back to Darren and I for a
Yeah.
quick second, like, so, okay, yeah, we were living together, but at the same time, like, as soon as we got home, it was like, okay, this is our same house, same everything. Life really technically hasn't changed, but at the same time, it felt like it was completely different now. Like, you even look at things differently now.
Yeah. Oh, that gives me chills. That's
because it's now, you know, you're in this bond together, and like, I'm sorry, you're not getting rid of me.
right.
Just you
said
want,
yes.
you're not. So no, like, it just, everything takes on a whole new meaning.
Yeah, it's so true. And that's so funny you say that, because that just, I wondered that too. Like, if there is there a point, like, you know, when you get married, and I'm sure, I mean, I just haven't experienced it firsthand, but I can imagine that's just, everything is so much more deep and serious in a good way. I mean,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And I mean, like you were saying, ours, like, I wasn't perfect. Like, I mean, I'm like, we've talked about in previous episodes, I'm like not a good communicator. I'm not good at being open and vulnerable. And so it was like, I had to grow a lot, you know, in those first few years, and still do, but I'm really glad we did it that way, because like, we both really had to consider upfront kind of what throughout that year when we were engaged, like, you know, okay, we're preparing for this commitment, make sure like we have all of our like, basically you're vetting the relationship, you know, like,
Yeah.
and so we kind of carried over that same attitude of like preparedness, like for all of like our first, you know, like, I mean, we tried to do what we could to prepare for marriage long term, which I'm grateful for now. But yeah, I mean, making the decision to get married is a really big one. I mean, when I see couples who live together break up and move on and just do the same cycle with other people, I think like the missing commitment piece doesn't allow for that same like growth or self-evaluation, because you can always just move on, you know?
Right.
You don't necessarily have to grow, you know?
Right. And I think, funny you say that again, because I feel like that's what I was, without saying it perfectly before, I feel like that's where I was trying to stress, like saying that, okay, it happened to work out for me that the person I was living with is the one that I ended up marrying. That is definitely not the case, I would say, most of the time for people. So I think that's why the whole like setup isn't necessarily always the best anyways, because who's to say that you're just not going to move on to the next person and then start all over again, rather than you're straight away being really serious with one person and then that's it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And kind of like, and like you were talking about, and not dating pointlessly, like, you know, you're like,
exactly.
Marriage.
And we, unfortunately, we live in a culture that encourages like pointless dating is somehow empowering.
Yeah. Like freedom and independence.
Yeah, which in the end it's not. And like I feel, and like that's something that I learned. That was one of the first things I learned about being married, was it's actually more empowering to be married, because like, first of all, this is your partner for life. So whatever it is, you got to work it out.
Yeah.
Versus like just continuing on a cycle of just really like toxic attitudes and just not being around good people most of the time, versus you end up learning more about yourself being married.
That's so true. That's so true. That's a great point, because there's like, because when you have that mirror, then you're always kind of like facing yourself. And I think one of the things is that is encouraging too, and it's also hard. And see, that's the thing, is like a lot of the best parts of marriages are also the hardest parts, because you do have to face yourself. But then when you grow, you feel so much more like healthy, and you feel like you're, I don't know, feel like you're walking more like into your calling as a Christian, because you're like, oh, this is what Jesus meant when he said, you know, lay your life down, or this is what Jesus, you know, that's
no, absolutely, totally.
But by always having the option to break up without like legalities attached, or without kind of like that sacred bond attached, you know, like attached to it, then there's much less opportunity to grow in Christ and experience that sacred unity that God promised. I mean, it's just kind of like playing house, you know, I mean, and I think that kind of affects our I think that affects like our soul in a way. Like, it just doesn't, I don't know. I mean, I just see my friends who have been married for a long time, and I'm like, wow, like you have like really flourished. And then friends who wanted to do this, this other path, and it just seems like it's more like holding it all together all the time.
Yeah, totally. And I think some of it too is like, when you say, like, going back to when you said marriage is hard, it is, but at the same time, like, at least for me personally, what I've felt is, in the times that it's been really hard, like, it was obviously really hard in the beginning because I had to grow up a lot. And then it was also really hard when I was a brand new mom and I'm like freaking out like every 10 minutes.
Oh yeah.
And like also really hormonal. So you're like, ah! So everything gets really hard. But at the same time, like, it's hard, but I never felt like I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
So I feel like in a lot of ways, like, marriage is a great like security blanket for the fact of you're allowed to mess up.
Yeah.
But in the end, this person still loves you and still
That's true.
is still willing to work with you no matter what.
That's true. That's a great point. I mean, I think Jason even said, like, like even at the beginning, he was like, I'm sure like there's going to be points where we're just going to be absolutely sick of each other, but I'm ready for it. He's like, I mean, and it's not like going to be it's a permanent thing,
Totally. No, and that's exactly right. So I think going out for anybody out there that may be having doubts of marriage, like, oh, I don't know, I'm scared to put in the work or whatever it is, it's all worth it. Like, whatever you think is scary about it, I feel like I want to say, like, it's still not that scary.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's a great point, because like when I remember first getting married and people were so negative, like they were.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I was like, wow, like you guys were saying it was so awful and it's like the best thing ever, so I think.
And then, or my other personal favorite, people that have been married like a really long time but aren't happy anymore, they put it down like, well, it's just because it's still new to you.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, okay, yeah, maybe, but at the same time, like, I don't feel like you should ever have that attitude about your spouse. Like, it's one thing where you might be sick of each other and maybe you don't have to spend every waking moment together.
Yeah.
Like, I've definitely been in two different rooms watching two separate shows, like that kind of thing. But I never feel like, oh, I'm just so sick of him.
Right. Like I never come home like, oh, it's you, Yeah,
exactly. Like I just don't feel like you're looking at marriage the wrong way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, and that's, I mean, I think that's part of that commitment piece too, is like, you're not just saying like, I'll say yes to you because like, or I'll commit to you so long as you're good to me. It's like,
right.
I'm going to commit to that attitude of the grass is greener where I water it. So I need to be putting in, all of that effort to be a good spouse every day too.
Totally. Yeah, and I just think all this, like, and we also live in an era too where people have kids together but aren't married.
Yeah.
I guess that was one I never understood, because where is the commitment? Like, okay, yes, you have kids together, that alone is a commitment, but in the end, there's still so many people that still, you can just pick up and leave. You're not tied to anything, whether even if it's legally or spiritually, and nothing. It's just, you can pick up and leave at any time. I guess I just don't understand that. Like, I didn't have a wedding, so Darren and I just got married. We didn't even go to the courthouse. Like, his brother was ordained to do weddings, so he literally signed our marriage certificate.
That's awesome.
So, and that's another thing too. So, like, if you're out there and you're like, oh, my boyfriend and I want to get married, but we just can't afford a wedding right now, like, look, I don't look at that as an excuse, because, well, for one, I did it. I didn't have a wedding. Not use myself, I guess, use myself as an example, but you can always do something later. So, like, I'm pretty sure my getting married cost like $60, and I live in a state that would take you for all the money you have for just signing a piece of paper. So I'm sure it's even cheaper in other places. But we said, like, someday we do want to have an actual wedding, probably when our son is old enough to figure out how to walk down an aisle with rings. But that being said, like, I don't think like not being able to have a wedding should stop you from being married, especially if you're living together, because then you're living, then you're not living in sin, as an old cliche would be.
Right, I know. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is like if you're living with someone and you want to like honor God with your relationship, if you're not sure if you want to be with them, then maybe it's a reconsideration of the
Right.
relationship too, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So like I think a lot of people think that the person that they're with has to make them happy. And I think that works to an extent. Like, of course, the person should make you happy, but I don't think your happiness should depend on that other person.
Yeah,
I think that's
exactly.
something a lot of us get hung up on too.
Exactly. And I think that that can really corrode, you know, your relationship a little bit. And like, I mean, when I hear like scary comments like that, I'm like, oh my gosh, if I experience any level of this, then my relationship's doomed. No, but you know, I notice like in my heart too, if I'm putting that burden of like Jason fulfilling me, that's a me issue. You know, like
Right.
I mean, because
Absolutely.
only our fulfillment comes from God. It's like what you were talking about when we were walking through sacred marriage. It's like knowing that God's at the center of it just takes a ton of pressure off, and it makes it so much more beautiful.
Which now that you mentioned it, that's a helpful guide to anyone. Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
That's his name. Yeah. That's a great one. Like I have it on audio, so I listen to it. I haven't listened to it in a little while, but it's definitely something that it's really realistic too. Like I feel he talks about everything and he talks about like stuff like past sins, like from another couple. I thought that one was huge, at least for like me personally. That was something that kind of hit home. He goes over all of it. Like it's nothing that's just it. Like it talks about the ugly stuff too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not and I never get the sense that it's like I never get the feeling like you're doing marriage wrong. It's like
right.
It's very much like, okay, like, you know, marriage can be messy, but it's all for God's glory. Like no matter what your starting point is. Yeah. Well, so speaking of really good examples for, you know, just kind of the impact of marriage. As long as I can remember, and I recently did some more research on this, you know, studies have always suggested that a negative correlation between living together before marriage, you know, with, you know, divorce rates. And like, again, like going back to what you're saying, Taylor, it seems like the practical, logical next step if you're in a relationship to see if marriage will work is to live together. And I think that's a common argument that's held in our culture. And while a recent study has shown that living together before marriage lowers the divorce rate within the first year, it still shows that long term, it actually has a negative impact on your marriage. Like, and I don't know why that is exactly, and maybe it's kind of like what we're talking about today, but I think, I mean, to me, I would just venture to guess that it has to do with that lack of, you know, commitment piece starting out, you know.
Yeah, lack of faith even, because you're not looking at your marriage as something serving God, but rather than just like, well, I guess this is what I'm supposed to do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just kind of like, yeah.
It's just like, there's no deeper meaning to behind what your marriage is. It's just like, oh, we're married.
Right. Like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I mean, which leads me to my next point, you know, it's kind of that mentality of keeping our options open. You know, we've talked a lot about like our current culture of like, you know, love yourself, like live your truth, whatever. And this is a huge correlation, you know, because like couples who live together, especially long term, like there's always an option to leave and just go find some other way to be happy.
Yep.
You know, and I mean, for Jason and I, it's like in addition to just wanting to honor God in our relationship, that was the most practical thing that made sense, like to wait on all those things for marriage, just because it really made us both decide like on forever before we made the commitment. So like we knew that like forever was like the starting point for us, even when we were dating, and which makes every decision later like such a no-brainer, because if you're deciding like based on, you know, okay, like we're going to be together forever versus if you're making decisions based on, well, I don't know where we're both going to be in 5 years. It's a little bit
different. That is a strange concept. Like if you're married, it should be like a we thing, not like two separate.
Right. Exactly. I'm curious, have you heard the this is something that I heard recently. Have you heard that mentality of like, we live together, like we're not getting married because we're choosing each other every single day? Is that something you've heard of?
Yeah, I have heard that before. I think that's been going on for a while. And like I said, I kind of going back to what I said earlier, that definitely seems like a thing, especially when they have kids together,
Yeah.
but aren't married. Because they're like, well, but I'm choosing to be here every day. Like, okay, like I choose to get up in the morning. Like I guess I just sort of feel like, yeah, every day is filled with choices. But I mean, but to be committed with somebody, I think is just deeper than you just saying, yeah, I'm committed to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, I think the commitment itself is the contract, so to speak, or it's like
Yeah.
it's like that overarching, like, okay, I know that we both agreed on this together, but the
Mhm.
choosing each other every single day speaks to the quality of your marriage.
Yeah, exactly. So I haven't heard that one in a while. That wow.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I mean, it's like when I hear that, I hear undertones from one of the partners or the other. Like one of them really wants to be married, but they're like, well, this is, I mean, it's almost like,
Yeah, I see, and that's interesting too, because I actually hear a slight undertone of deep down, I want the heck out of here.
ooh, yeah, interesting.
Because, like, well, I'm choosing you, but deep down, I really want to be out partying.
Ooh,
I
yeah.
don't know. I just like, that's really interesting. Now we both kind of have two different perspectives on that. Like, I
Yeah.
get what you're saying totally, but yeah, I don't know. I just sort of have like this weird negative feel about, well, I'm choosing you. Like I said, I choose to get up every day, but I don't have to. You know what I mean? Like it's
Right. Like
I don't know.
I could just go whenever I want. Yeah.
That's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah. It's like, well, I really wanted, like you're saying, I really wanted to go to the party, or I wanted to go off and do my own thing, but
Yeah. And
almost
I
like a
feel like,
guilt trip.
yeah, yes, that's exactly what I'm looking for. That's exactly what it feels like to me.
So funny. Yeah.
Like I would almost be offended if someone said that to me. I'm choosing you every day.
Yeah.
Well, because you have so many other options. Like I
Right.
don't know. Because that's what I get the impression of. Like I have options, but I'm choosing you.
Yeah. Like, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I didn't think that was a question before, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
I really like your point here though too. It's the marriage equals commitment, commitment equals stability.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Which
you brought up that Matt Walsh. You had me listen to that Matt Walsh podcast about choosing.
Yeah, if I find it again, maybe we can put it on like episode notes or something. But yeah, that one is really, I think I think it ties into the above one that we were just talking about, because stability is a huge thing. And especially if you're raising a family, stability really should be like number one.
Yeah.
Out of those, because kids really shouldn't be raised in an unstable household. So, and not to mention, like, dating today sounds awful.
I know. Oh my gosh, yeah. I listen to stuff on the radio, like, about dating and, like, because it seems like, because people send in letters about, like, their boyfriend or girlfriend, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, thank God I'm not dating anymore. It's horrendous. Like, just stuff that people put each other through,
Yeah. But I think commitment and stability definitely goes hand in hand. So I really think that's a big one.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like, I mean, we're gonna, in the next month or so, we're gonna start talking about fear. And that's, I mean, to me, and I think to you too, Taylor, like when we're dealing with fear, especially of abandonment, knowing that there's that commitment there really helps us kind of unwind a little bit from that fear,
Right.
and really flourish too, because when you kind of unwind from like, is my partner going to leave? Is my partner going to leave? Is my partner going to leave? Then you're like, oh, like I can sink into this and I can focus on, like being a whole person and being, and which makes you a better wife, and like, helps you feel more free to serve the Lord and to love your husband. And it's just like it's like a healthy, like self-perpetuating cycle versus that fear cycle when you don't have that stability.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, and another point too is like, so marriage is sacred. I mean, it's so sacred that it's one of the sacraments in the Catholic Church. And a sacrament is basically, I don't know. I mean, I know I'm not going to say this perfectly, but it's essentially an outward grace that represents the grace of Christ. So like another sacrament would be communion or baptism. And so these are really, really big, important parts of the Christian faith. And so to show like, which really shows like the grace of God, and marriage is one of those. And so to honor God in this sacrament of marriage is like one of the highest honors. And that's something that Gary Thomas talks about in Sacred Marriage, is that you know, you can serve, because for a long time there was a thought circulating the church that in order to be the most holy, you kind of have to be celibate, and you have to dedicate your life to being either a missionary or a priest or whatever. And that was kind of like a subsect of the church, that like, oh, like those are like the really holy ones if they set themselves apart for God like that. But Gary Thomas was saying like, well, if you want to be holy, I mean, marriage is like a huge mirror to like how well you're serving God, you know? So, not to mention like that, the verse that says a 3-cord strand cannot be broken. So remembering that marriage is an honor and a privilege, but then also that God's at the center is pretty big deal. But yeah, but yeah, and there's one more point too, like, you know, with marriage, is that Paul talks about being equally yoked. So, you know, in the early church, when people were getting saved, some people were not married yet, and they were talking about getting married. And I think this is actually where Paul says, like, you know, if you can be single, be single. But he was also saying, like, if you're already married and your spouse isn't a Christian, then like don't, like, unless your spouse takes an issue with it, okay, you know, then let them go, whatever. But he was saying, like, if your spouse doesn't take issue with your new faith, then, you know, I mean, like, don't go anywhere. Like, maybe your faith will save your spouse too. And then, but he's saying if you aren't married yet, like, you know, it's important to be equally yoked, or like, you know, find someone else with your faith. And I think that's huge for sure. Like, you know, because then you kind of have that baseline. I don't know. What do you think, Taylor?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is also super relevant right now, because there's a lot of people out there that are not Christian and just living in the secular world.
Yeah.
And so I would say, if you're a young lady out there and you have a boyfriend that is not a Christian and definitely has no desire of being one, that is not the place for you.
Yeah.
And that's coming from somebody who would say no to people because they were Christian and I wasn't at the time. So,
in a life, yeah.
In a whole different world, that was the case. And it's so funny because I look back on it now, I'm like, wow, I was so mean. But no, it definitely, I think equally yoked, that's a really great way to put it too. I think, yeah, I just don't think it's a place for you if somebody is not. Like I said, it's one thing if they weren't, because like, hey, I've never been shown the ways, but I'm definitely interested and I'm definitely willing to do this with you. I think that's completely different than being like, no. Because that means you're just going to have totally different beliefs on like literally everything.
Yeah.
If he believes one thing and you believe in another. And I mean, like when it comes to like morals, even, it's just not going to work for you, because he's going to maybe believe in, let's just say, even getting divorced. And you're like, no, I mean, this is a sacred bond that we started, that I can't allow it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so true.
And not to mention, they'll just look at marriage differently, where you're looking at it as a sacred bond. He's looking at it as the next phase in his life, as we've been talking about. So no, this is completely accurate and completely huge.
Yeah. That's a great point. And then, you know, same thing too, is like being on the same page. If something, you have a disagreement on something, like, no matter what, if you're both Christians in marriage, and the central point is to honor God, you're going to find a common ground, because I mean, God is your common ground, you know.
Right. And I would even say too, like, let's just say you're a Christian and he's Jewish. I would say that would probably still work, because it's pretty much the same moral beliefs, the same foundations. I mean, essentially Christianity came from Judaism, and like that's what the whole Old Testament is. So I would say that's different than him having no faith.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's the same God, same, like,
Right.
I mean, you shared the majority of the scriptures and
Right.
you said same morals and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, totally. That's a great point. So, what would you recommend? I mean, if someone's like living with their boyfriend or girlfriend right now, and they're new Christian or whatever.
Good question. As somebody that went through that, I would definitely say, like, take a good hard look at what you're doing right now. Even, I mean, pray about it, everything, and think about, is this somebody that I really want to marry? If the answer is yes, then I would say, you two go take your happy little selves to the courthouse and get married. And then if not, if this is somebody that you just are like, I thought I was happy, but I don't see myself because, XYZ reason, I would just get out now, because it's better that you get out now from something and then save yourself definitely for sure heartache, and then maybe, so just something even way worse, like, getting divorced in 2 years or something.
Right.
So I guess that is a decision to make on your own, but my suggestion would be definitely to pray about it and think long and hard about what you're really doing right now.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I mean, and you make a great point too, like even, I mean, we're talking, coming from a faith-filled perspective, but I mean, even from just a on its face practical perspective, if we took faith out of the equation, like if you're like, are you really fulfilled? Like,
right.
being
Yeah,
in a
definitely.
like, type of relationship too. Is this really what you want for the long term?
Yeah. So by no means are we trying to condemn or shame anyone who is currently living with a boyfriend or girlfriend. Like I said, I have no place to judge anybody on that. But our goal here is just to present the facts and, some food for thought for living together in whatever situation you're in. So maybe this is reason enough for you to talk to your partner about marriage, or maybe it's a wake-up call like we were just talking about. But and look at your future and to see if it's about honoring God together, or if you need to take a separate way.
Yeah.
Because if you definitely can't see yourself like marrying the person, and then, what do you look at your life together in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Who knows what's down the line? So now would be a great time to really look at that.
Yeah, that's a great point. For sure.
So I guess the takeaway here is that we know that being a Christian is difficult in today's society, which is basically why we're here in the first place.
Right.
But it's all kind of still comes down to, like we've also talked about in previous episodes, that it's not about your truth or God's, it's all about God's truth. Right. So, which still ties into, if you're looking at your life and it's not what God wants for you, and it's not God, you're not living God's truth, then again, get out. So, because marriage is awesome. It's the most sacred thing ever. And it really is fulfilling. Like, it's probably the most fulfilling thing that you could ever do. And this is, I mean, and then on top of that, being a parent eventually down the line for anybody is even more, you'll even get a whole new level of fulfillment. And it's even better when you're with somebody that you are meant to be with,
Yeah, absolutely.
Raising this little life together.
Oh, man. That's so cool. Yeah.
Yes. So today we are going to leave you with the verse from 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 17. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all the things. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. See you in the next episode.
Bye now.